Hello everyone, so let's get started. So this week's data number 8, this time I like to take the United Nations data, especially for like United Nations resolution calls for humanitarian truce in Gaza. And I want to see like how countries voted. So it turned out you can actually get the United Nations resolution voting data from United Nations website, but it takes a little bit of a wrangling and it's something you need to know. So that's the kind of stuff like I would like to share with you today. Okay, so let's get started. Last Friday, there was like a United Nations resolution was voted, basically like demanding for ceasefire or like truce in Gaza. So this is more like for the humanitarian truce, put aside who's right, who's justice, wrong, bad kind of stuff. It's like, hey, you know what? Let's stop the war. Let's stop the conflict for now so that like we can save like innocent civilians. Anyway, so here's a Reuters news. And when I read here, it's basically United Nations General Assembly voted it. And it called for immediate humanitarian truce between Israel and the Palestinian militants Hamas, and then demanded aid access to the besieged Gaza Strip and the protection of civilians. I think that's the really important key of this resolution. I think it passed because of the 120 votes in favor, or meaning the 120 countries said yes, and then 45 countries said abstain. That means refused to say yes or no. And the 14 countries, including Israel and the United States, said no. Turned out later on, I think this country, Iraq, changed its vote from absentee to yes. So it turned out there was 121 countries said yes, and the 44 countries said abstentions. Okay, so basically I like to get this voting data and then visualize it on the map so that I can see like which countries said yes or no or absent in a more intuitive way. So how can we find this data? Well, it turned out they actually publicized this data on the United Nations. I Googled it at the United Nations resolution vote records. And then there's a first one that came out. It was like a United Nations website. If I go there, and then if I scroll down, it says voting data. Any resolution after 1946, basically the beginning of the United Nations, right? And you can access to it. So like if I click on United Nations digital library, and then here it is, I can find the resolution that we are talking about. Two things here. So under the collections, it says voting data. So that means all the results have something to do with voting data. And if you open this digital library, United Nations digital library page directly, then you might not have this voting data being selected. So that means any documents to do with United Nations be listed here. But we're interested in United Nations resolutions voting data, right? So that's why this is actually perfect. Another thing is, if I click on this, for example, like Gaza, Israel, or Ukraine, or anything, and then it will give you the list of resolutions that have something to do with the keyword. Right now, the result is sorted by the relevance. If you are finding the latest resolution, the best way to do is click on this latest first. If I click on it, this is the latest resolutions. I mean, sorted by latest resolution. The first one is supposed to be the last resolution, right? And then this one's, if I read it, protection of civilians and upholding legal humanitarian obligations. I have no idea what this really means, but the date is 2023, October 27, which is last Friday. This article from Reuters says that's October 27. That's when they wrote this article. So it looks like this is the resolution that they're talking about. And another thing, though, to pay attention is that the title sometimes has this Security Council. Security Council is the only 15 countries. So those resolutions has like only 15 countries, total voting membership is 15. As opposed to that, the regular, or I don't know which is regular, but General Assembly, the all countries joining voting, which has a total voting membership 193. So you can either see like this, like voting country numbers or the title to distinguish between the vote or resolution vote at the General Assembly or the Security Council. But this time, we want to get the data from the General Assembly's resolution. So I can click on this first one to see the detail. When I read the agenda, I can grasp a better sense than just a title. So the agenda is illegal Israeli action in occupied East Jerusalem and the rest of the occupied Palestine territories. Occupied by Israeli settlement policy. I still don't know what it is, but it's at least something around that, like Israel and the Palestine area, right? But we already know what this is because we read this article. So I'm not going to go into that detail. All I can say here is like they are demanding for the immediate truce. I'm not familiar with this word called truce, but it's basically the ceasefire or stopping the conflict, stopping the violence. And then here is the data. So the 120 countries says yes. Like I said in this article, that turned out one country, Iraq, changed from abstentions to yes. So we're going to adjust that later. But right now we have 120 countries yes, 14 countries no, and so on. And then when you look at this data, unfortunately, they don't provide this data in a CSV format. That's really unfortunate. However, at least they have this data embedded in this web page. And then it says the first one is Y or A or N. That is based on the voting result, right? So, and then space, and then a country name. So that means we can actually get this data and put this one in a CSV file, and then like later we can actually separate those two, right? So, but in exploratory, you can actually copy and paste and bring this one in as the text input data, and then like automatically separate those. I'll show you in a minute. What we need to do is copy and paste this data, okay? And all the way down to the bottom, which is Zimbabwe is the last country, and then just using a shift key and then select all of them. So make sure like we copy all of that stuff. Like we don't want to copy some random other data. So starting from Afghanistan to ending as Zimbabwe. And then use Control C or Command C, depends on if you use Windows or Mac. And then you go to exploratory, and then you can bring in as a text input data. So like select the text input menu, and here just paste that whatever the one that you copy. Okay, so at this point, we can click on Run button, but you're going to get the error message saying like some data format was not correct or something like that. That's because look at here, for example, this country, Benin, doesn't have any vote. So that means what this country is doing here. So that it turned out there are some countries that says no voting, 14 countries. Okay, so that means they didn't even show up. I don't know the detail, how they exactly vote, but they didn't even say yes or no absentee. Okay, they just didn't vote. Okay, so there's a slight difference between the abstentions and no voting. I don't really quite understand, but basically, to me, it's basically the same thing. They didn't say yes or no for whatever the reasons, right? So, and those non-voting doesn't have any sign here. So I'm going to add those manually in this data. Okay. And then, so for example, what I'm saying is like, if I type this like a V or something, this means non-voting. Okay. And I'm going to change that to more like a readable name later after we import. But for now, so I said V and a space. And then I'm going to go by one. It's so for example, here, I'm going to set that here as well. And the last one is Venezuela. Okay, so I think all the countries, those 14 countries, I typed the V sign at the beginning. And then if that looks okay, then I'm going to click on Run button to see like that works. Okay, and here looks like it's working. So like the first column is the Y or N, a voting result. And then the second column is a country. The problem is though, look at the column name, is actually there's a Y and Afghanistan. And this is because like this default setting takes like the first row as a header, the column header. But in this case, I don't want that. Like these are the data, not the column header. You can actually change this one to no. And then this is going to give us like a sort of like a virtual name, right? It's like an X1, X2 column name as well. And that's fine too. And then you can import and you can change the column name later. But also, we are entering the data here. So why don't we just give the column name row, right? So like what I'm gonna do is like first row as a header, I'm gonna just switch it back to yes. And now like I'm gonna add the first row, the column name here. So this is like a vote, and then make sure like we have the space to be consistent with the other rows. And then here is a country. Okay. And if I click on run button, then now like we have the vote and the country as a column names, and Afghanistan is now the first row of the data. And this looks perfect. And by the way, the data separator is default is the auto. That means like, figure it out based on data. Could be comma, could be semicolon, whatever. This time it figures it out like this should be space. Cool thing about this though, even though some countries has a space in the name, but it doesn't create another column just because of that. Because I think that especially the first row is like, doesn't have that space, and then it learns from the data. Okay, so it looks okay. So we don't have to change any other parameters. And then we can just click on the save button to import that data. I'm going to give it a name, UN resolution, something to be recognizable, and then import that data. And then boom, we got that data now here. So it looks like okay here, right? So like why, yes, country 120, absentee 45, no is 14. I'm gonna go check the original data. I make sure that we have the same stats and looks okay. And then there's three things we wanna actually work on this data before we visualize it. Number one is that both is YANV is sort of hard to understand, especially for the audience that I'm going to show it after this, right? So let's change this name to be something like the easier to recognize. So we can use this replace value with new values. And then A is this abstentions, right? So I'm going to just type that like abstentions here. And then N is no, and V is non-voting, and Y is yes. And then like, I'm going to just click on run button and then change those values. So that looks okay. And the second is this country. This country, let's go to the table view. And then this one is like a first problem is that all the letters are capital. So it's kind of hard to read. I want to change this capitalizing rules to be like a title case, which means first letter of the word to be the capital or uppercase, and then rest should be lowercase. Okay. And also another thing is like some of the country has like this bracket thing. It's probably like a formal name or something like that, but it's not necessarily a familiar name with most people. So for example, here is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. I have no idea which one, which Korea this one is. This is actually North Korea, right? So like I want to change this to be something more familiar names. To do, we call it like standardizing the country name. You can actually do under the replace values, but this time you can select convert country name / code. So this dialog usually used to convert between country code and country name. So for example, United States, the country code is US. Japan's country code is JP. And sometimes you get the data with country code and you want to convert that to country name so that like you can see what the, which countries for each. So you can use that way, but this time we're going to convert from country name to country name. That sounds like kind of stupid, but it's actually whatever the country names to the standardized country name. So if I click on a preview, first of all, you notice that it's all country name is like a title case now. And another thing is, for example, and becomes ampersand symbol. And then another thing is, see here, for example, Bolivia, bracket, something, something, become just Bolivia. So that's good enough for most people to recognize what this is. And another thing is that the one that could be so that this country name is like a Democratic People something Korea becomes North Korea. Okay, and that looks okay. So like if I click run and then it just clean up the column name, standardize it, and then we got this information. Okay. Another thing you remember that we had in the Reuters article says like Iraq changed their voting from abstentions to no, yes. So we need to actually take care of that. So let's take a look where the Iraq data is. And here, so this Iraq, it says abstentions, but this is supposed to be yes. So how can we change that? Well, we can actually replace it by using conditions. So only the current row, that country name is Iraq, change it to yes, right? So to replace values, not with new values, this time with conditions. This is like override the target column. That's fine. We don't need to create the new columns. And then what's the condition? Condition is that country has to be Iraq. So I'm going to select Iraq. Okay. And then here is it says a text, and I'm going to say that is yes. Okay. So if I click run button here, and I'm expecting Iraq to be yes. And the problem is everything becomes NA. That's the problem. So I got to click on that box and token. And then what happened was that I didn't say anything for the default value. So if it didn't meet the condition, this is a country equal Iraq, it becomes NA. Well, that's a problem. So like, I don't want that to happen. So can we keep it as original values? Yes, you can. So click on this NA part and it says column. And then this is a vote. So that means if it didn't meet the condition, we're going to use the vote original value. So click on run button, and then it's using the original values, except Iraqi row. This one now is becoming yes. Used to be absenting, but now it becomes yes. Okay. And let's make sure that what we have like a right number of the countries to be yes. So they can go to this, click on the I icon here, and it says yes is 121 countries, which is perfect. I think that's it for data wrangling part. And then like let's visualize this data on the map. So select map standard, and then select the world country map. You have two options, but this time let's go with the Atlantic Ocean centered. And then let's select the country is a country column. And the default is like each country has its own circle. But this time I want to color each country's area. So I'm going to select the area, and then it's all light blue color. That's because we didn't assign anything to the color by. So I'm going to assign this vote. We have 4 different distinctive colors based on the voting status. Okay. And from here, we can actually change the color to be more intuitive. So I'm going to go to the color setting. And then I'm going to say yes to be green, no to be red. And then these abstentions, this to be more like a gray. It didn't really say anything, right? So like a non-voting too. I'm going to make a slight difference between abstentions and non-voting. So I'm going to give it a light gray for non-voting, and then click apply. Here it is. So now like we have the Atlantic Ocean Center based map with the countries says no to the truce in Gaza colored by the red color. So like, for example, United States, and then some here is which country is Paraguay and Guatemala said no. And then obviously like the center of the conflict is Israel says no. And then some countries in the middle Europe, Central Europe says no as well. But majority of the countries seems have said yes. And then, but like a country like Japan, and then some of the countries in Europe says abstentions. So that means not like either yes or no for whatever the reasons. Overall, I think the people in the world wants to have this conflict to stop, or they don't want to see more violence, regardless like who is right, who has justification or not. It's just that it's hard for most people in the most countries don't want to see that innocent citizens becoming victims, like sort of like every hour, every day. Right? Okay, so that's it for today. We look at the United Nations data, and it turned out all the data are on their website. The problem is it's not like CSV or Excel and easy to access data, but you can copy and paste and use that as a text input data. And then you do a few data wrangling so that like now like you can visualize this time on the map, or any other chart types as well. So especially today, it's very important that you can grab your data by yourself. If you need to clean up or transform as it needs, then you should be able to do it by yourself. And then you can visualize, then you can see the world maybe different way from all the media are trying to tell you. All right, so that's it for today, and thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.